Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to anyone calling in who's not in Eastern Standard Time. This is Rashida Latif, the National Field Organizer at National Alliance to End Homelessness, and thank you for joining our webinar. We're going to get started, and we want to encourage you to send us your questions. I want to remind everyone that all of the lines will be muted during the webinar. If you have questions at any point, you can send them to us through the webinar software. Please type them into the chat box labeled questions on your webinar control panel. We will have time at the end of the webinar to answer many of your questions, and we have many participants today, so we'll do our best to get as many questions as possible, but we may not get to all of them. Also, please note that the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Alliance's website by early next week. And thank you again for joining us. And so we're going to jump right into our agenda. Today we'll be reviewing Capitol Hill Day. I know so many of you are excited to be joining our conference, and Capitol Hill Day is the very last day of our conference. And then we're going to go into our Alliance policy priorities. We're really happy to provide some of you all with this information. There have been many questions, so we're here by popular demand. We're going to go into keeping up with your advocacy. It's very important to follow up our advocacy throughout the year after Capitol Hill Day, and so this will give you tips on what you can do through the rest of the calendar year, and then we'll go into questions. So Capitol Hill Day, again, that's the last day of our conference on ending homelessness. So the conference starts on Monday, July 23rd, and our Capitol Hill Day is going to be Wednesday, July 25th from 1 to 5 p.m. So is Capitol Hill Day for you? Absolutely. Capitol Hill Day is for anyone who wants to participate. We want to empower our constituents to become involved. We also want to empower you throughout the rest of the calendar year to make sure that our advocacy is effective. So we hope that this is the beginning of a long-standing relationship with the Alliance, and particularly with me, your National Field Organizer. So through these face-to-face meetings with Congress and their staff, you have an opportunity to establish and build relationships with congressional offices, educate elected officials on success and progress at home in your home district or your state, and we encourage them to work in support of policy initiatives to eliminate homelessness. This year's event will focus on asking for continued federal investments in ending homelessness and educating Congress on the progress we've made toward that goal. So again, you really don't need any special skills to be participating in Capitol Hill Day. Also, we are here to help you with everything that you need, and we'll support you every step of the way. You just need to share your perspective on the work that you're doing every day. So the Alliance and the designated state captains from your area will provide you with resources and talking points to help you get ready for a great meeting. Your state captain and the Alliance will schedule your visit and make sure you know where to go to participate in Capitol Hill Day. And so how does Capitol Hill Day work? For all of you who have questions. So the Alliance provides Capitol Hill Day participants with a number of opportunities to get prepared, comfortable, and excited for their time on the Hill. So on Monday, July 23rd, which is the first day of our conference, the Alliance will host a pre-conference session called Advocacy and Policy, making your voice heard on Capitol Hill Day and every day to provide information on advocacy basics, Hill Day policy priorities, and tips and techniques for taking your advocacy back home. So staff will review these policies to ensure that participants and other interested advocates have all the information necessary for successful Hill visits. They'll also address key logistical questions regarding participation. The Alliance will also have a Capitol Hill Day and advocacy table at the conference where we all encourage for you all to stop by, say hello. You could pick up resources and connect with us. We're very friendly. And state captains will hold prep sessions to prepare for the congressional meetings. You can find the state prep session times and locations listed on the conference app or posted near the Capitol Hill Day table. So if you have any questions about your state prep session and meetings, you can reach out to your state captain or your state captains if your state has more than one state captain, which is likely the case for really big states. So you can ask your state captain directly, or you can stop by the Capitol Hill Day table.
All right. Hi, everybody. This is Steve Berg, Vice President for Programs and Policy at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And what we're going to do for the next little bit on this webinar is talk about what we see as the important policy priorities for the upcoming Capitol Hill Day and really for the rest of the year. I do want to point out there are other things in the works. There are members of Congress who are writing legislation that we're talking to them about. So there might be some new things that come up. There might be some new things that come up in time for the conference. There might be some new things that come up later in the year. But for right now, these are the things we know we're going to have to be working on. It's about appropriations, which is, of course, the word that they use in Congress for the process of figuring out how much money they're going to spend on various federal programs. And our primary focus is on HUD's Homeless Assistance Grants, which is the Continuum of Care and the Emergency Solutions Grants, and also some of the larger HUD affordable housing programs like the voucher program and the public housing programs. We're going to be talking about the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness and how to make sure they continue to have the legal authority they need to operate. And we're going to be talking about work requirements. This is not, the work requirements issue is not just one bill. There's a number of bills where this comes up, but Chandra is going to fill us in today on some of the things that are going on there, some of the things to watch out for, and some of the sort of key talking points that people working on homelessness will want to know about. Okay, next slide. Okay, the first policy priority is, of course, the homeless assistance grants. When the Appropriations Committee talks about homeless assistance grants, that's the name they use for the account that funds the Continuum of Care program and also the Emergency Solutions Grants program. So those are the HUD programs that are specifically targeted at homelessness. People working in this field are, of course, very familiar with that. Many people in the field, their own salaries are paid for by these programs. The programs are the main engine for getting homeless people back into housing, to keeping homeless people safe while they're waiting to be helped back into housing. So these are a priority for us, and we're really the people who come to our Hill Day and who work with us are the main people that are educating members of Congress about these programs. Next slide. So what we're talking about is the fiscal 2019 appropriations. Fiscal 2018 has been passed by Congress already. Many of you on this call are taking time away from working on the NOFA right now that's going to determine how that fiscal 2018 money gets spent. You can see on the slide there the funding level in fiscal 2018 was $2.513 billion. That was a healthy increase over the year before, but it's still not enough to really do what we need to do. The administration asked for an even smaller number than that. That is not getting a lot of play on the Hill. What's more important is that both the House and the Senate committees have already passed versions of the bill, and you can see the numbers there. The House has both House and Senate have modest increases in the account. The Senate increase is a little bigger. Our ask is for $2.8 billion for 2019. That we believe would be sufficient to really allow communities to take a much more active stance in terms of housing more people who are homeless and really getting to the point where more and more communities can look at these programs and say we're succeeding at ending homelessness in our community. Next slide. All right, so that was the homeless assistance grants. The next set of accounts we want to talk about are these larger affordable housing accounts. They're for people who are really low income, with really low incomes, there are 4 different HUD appropriations accounts that cover housing for about 3.5 million households. There's tenant-based rental assistance, otherwise known as Section 8, tenant-based Section 8, or the Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. There's project-based rental assistance, which is for what people are familiar with, the older project-based Section 8 account. So many communities have these buildings that are owned by either a nonprofit or by a for-profit landlord, and the project-based rental assistance is the account that helps keep the rent affordable in those buildings. And then there's public housing, which is housing that's owned and operated by the local PHAs, public housing authorities. And there are two separate accounts for that. There's operating funds, which are the day-to-day costs, and capital grants, which are used more for major repairs or renovation. And in the last several years, the capital grants have been sort of underfunded, which is causing a lot of public housing to have longer-term deterioration that people are trying to turn around right now. Okay, next slide. So this gives basically what the ask is for the tenant-based rental assistance account. We feel like of those four I just talked about, the one that where it seems like the final number will still be up in the air quite a bit when you get here for Hill Day and maybe for the rest of the year is tenant-based rental assistance. And of course, that's one that tends to be where any new housing for low-income people has come from over the last several years. The other accounts are sort of, it's more like maintaining the existing level. But with tenant-based rental assistance, we have actually seen, and I think have a possibility this year of getting more housing for low-income people, and particularly for people who are at risk of homelessness or trying to leave homelessness. You can see the numbers there. There's the possibility of getting more HUD vouchers, getting more FUB vouchers, getting more mobility vouchers for families with children. That's something you'll hear more about when you come to the conference. But these are the numbers we're looking for. The result of this would be that the existing funding for vouchers that are already out there in the community would be solid, and would also mean that we'd have a chance to increase the overall pool of vouchers to keep up with some of the need, and again, really targeted toward the people in our community who are often most at risk of homelessness. Okay, let me leave it there and let's move on to the next slide. Okay, and then the one last thing I'm going to talk about is the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. People are familiar with USICH. I think it's what the name says, an interagency federal group that brings together all the different federal agencies and departments that touch on homelessness in one way or the other. They're very helpful to us in terms of helping keep the federal agencies moving in a good direction and coordinated with each other. Some of the most important things we're doing now do involve the work of a couple different federal agencies. The work on homeless veterans, of course, requires a lot of coordination between HUD and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Some of the work that's happening right now with homelessness among people with mental illness is requiring a lot of coordination between HUD and the Department of Health and Human Services. Same thing with family homelessness, same thing with youth homelessness. And USICH does very important work in Washington to get these agencies to talk to each other and work together. But also we find very much at the local level, USICH has regional staff and they get very active in local communities to help people get the different federal agencies as they exist in the community, where federal resources that are coming into the community to help people get those organized with each other. Next slide, please. USICH, as people may know, in the law that sets USICH up, it has sort of a hard deadline for it to exist. Unlike a lot of other federal programs, if it gets to a certain date, then by the law, it's supposed to go out of existence and shut down. that deadline has been pushed back each year for the last several years. But right now, I think the disruption to USICH's operation from having that continue to happen is something we want to put an end to. And there are members of Congress who are helping with us with this. You can see under our ask, you can see the bill numbers there. There's both a House bill and a Senate bill. And what both of these things would do would be to get rid of that hard deadline or hard end date for USICH, and just to allow it to continue until Congress determines that it's not needed anymore. And then, of course, it sets its budget at the amount that it's been set at the last couple of years, which is sufficient to do what it needs to do. So one of our other asks, besides the spending that I talked about before, is to move these two House and Senate bills forward to permanently authorize USICH. Next slide, please. Okay, let me turn it over to Chandra, and she'll talk about work requirements.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I'm going to begin. I am going to talk about work requirements. I'm going to start with some basics, and then I'm going to talk about some bills and some guidance that's been issued. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about what we could do as advocates and what we should be looking out for around work requirements. Okay, so let's begin. Work requirements don't work. What do we mean when we say that? So while lawmakers, they often cite Clinton administration changes to TANF program as proof that work requirements can improve other safety net programs or improve the lives of program participants. So what do we know from 20 years of evidence about that argument? So one, we know after implementation of work requirements through TANF that immediate employment increases were modest at best and receded over time. Stable employment for anyone subject to work requirements was rare. And most TANF recipients subject to work requirements stayed poor, and some became even poorer. So in contrast from what we've seen is that voluntary employment programs, those are the ones that can significantly boost employment without the negative impact of abruptly ending assistance before recipients have achieved stability. So notably, the HUD's Jobs Plus program provided access to employment and training services for public housing residents and adjusted rent burden calculations for participants to allow them to keep a larger share of their earnings. So two things, Jobs Plus significantly increased earnings and employment for residents who chose to participate. And these increases were sustained for at least 3 years after the program ended. And so you clearly didn't see those results from work requirements from TANF. So what are we looking at now? What's the current status? So right now, the administration has indicated that attaching work requirements to any and all safety net programs is a priority. Oh, yeah, I was going to say next page, thank you. Issuing an executive order which directs agencies like HHS, HUD, USDA, among others, to expand the reach of existing work requirements and impose new work requirements where they don't currently exist. So the administration and Congress, they've already made a number of efforts to more broadly impose work requirements in various programs. And so I'm sure many of you are aware about some of the requirements around Medicaid eligibility. And really that applies to those in the expansion states. And so as you may or may not know, a federal judge in Kentucky recently rejected one such waiver. But the governor then again turned around and revoked dental and eye care for recipients. But that's just one example of what's been happening. And so obviously we're going to wait to see what happens in the several other states that did get their waivers approved for work requirements. So also what's up, the House passed its version of this year's Farm Bill with the addition of more stringent work requirements to determine eligibility for SNAP. HUD released a rent reform proposal, the Making Affordable Housing Work Act, which, if enacted, this would allow public housing authorities and housing providers to establish work requirements for individuals and households. And so next up, the last bill that we'll focus on is Bill HR 2069, and that's the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act. And that bill would give preference for public housing and housing choice vouchers to youth aging out of foster care, but that would also impose education or training requirements and or mandatory participation in a program that requires work as a qualification for maintaining benefits. So those are some of the bills that we're following. And so what is our ask? And you can flip to the next slide, please. Okay, there we go. So as advocates, we really want you to pay close attention to state laws or regulations that may restrict access to safety net programs on the basis of work. So Congress should reject any proposals that include work requirements and restrict access to essential safety net programs for the most vulnerable Americans. And so further, voluntary programs that encourage training, education, and increase employment should be scaled up. Specifically, states should not apply for waivers that force Medicaid recipients to lose their coverage. The House should take up the Senate version of this year's Farm Bill, which maintains existing requirements for SNAP beneficiaries. And any administrative or congressional proposal to reform the public housing or voucher program should not include work requirements of any kind. And so what we are positive about that programs such as HUD's Moving to Work Demonstration or Family Self-Sufficiency program should be further evaluated and scaled up if effective. So lastly, what I do want to close with is, so why are these work requirements really burdensome to people experiencing homelessness? And so there are a host of reasons, but even the paperwork and the bureaucracy themselves, in and of itself, is challenging for people experiencing homelessness. And so obviously, without a reliable address, people are likely to miss important notices from states explaining exemptions if they do have them, and the paperwork requirements. And for example, when we talk about Medicaid, for a state like Kentucky, it does have an exemption, but you really have to have documentation to prove that you are an exempt, and you have to meet strict guidelines and deadlines. So like I said, even the bureaucracy itself just poses a very big challenge and a barrier to access. And so we just really want to keep that in mind as we advocate and really talk to Congress about rejecting any proposals that include work requirements and their impact on people experiencing homelessness. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think it's back to me. It's Steve Berg again. For people who are coming to the conference, these are a couple of things where we'll be going into more detail about some of these proposals. We'll be able to talk about some last-minute things that, again, I said we might get some surprises. So we'll be able to talk about what those are, and we'll be able to answer whatever questions might come up at the last minute. So there's a pre-conference session Monday morning that Noelle Porter, who runs our congressional relations, has put together, where you'll be hearing from some people who have been successful about getting advocacy work going, and also hear more detail about the policy priorities and last minute. So that's Monday morning between 9 and noon, right before the conference kickoff session at 1 o'clock. And then also look for S108, which is the S indicates one of the spotlight sessions, which is a shorter session, that'll again be really focusing on the substance of what we're going to be talking about. If you don't have time for the whole 3-hour session on Monday, you can just come to this, which will be a little shorter, which will just be me talking about the policy priorities, again, with last minute information, and any questions you might want to ask. One of the particular things we're looking at is we may be seeing a bill that fixes this problem with the HUD-VASH program. If people are familiar, there's a certain number of chronically homeless veterans who, because of the complicated rules at the VA, are not eligible for VA health services. And if they're not eligible for VA health services, they're not eligible for HUD-VASH. And this bill would fix that and say that basically any chronically homeless veteran would be eligible for HUD-VASH and eligible for the case management from VA that comes with that. If that bill actually gets introduced in time for our conference, then we'll be talking about it there. So that's what's going to be happening at our conference in terms of more opportunities to learn about this. And then to talk about some of the things after the conference that we're going to try to do to push these priorities, let me turn it back to Rashida.
Thanks, everyone. So we really want to encourage for everyone to continue their advocacy through the rest of the calendar year, through 2018. It wouldn't be enough for us to show up and show out very strong on July 25th during our lobby day if we didn't follow it up, increasing momentum and continuing to apply pressure to the stakeholders who are really going to help us achieve our goals and chipping away at the process to end homelessness. So we really want to encourage for everyone to take advantage of your August recess. We really want to encourage everyone to schedule and arrange site visits. We really want you all to visit your member offices when you get back to your home state or your home district. So, you know, if during Hill Day you met with senators or you met with, you know, your elected rep, we really want to encourage for you to follow up with that, continue building your relationships, continue educating, and continue being in touch with them, letting them know that ending homelessness is very much a priority for you. The more familiar that you are with your reps, the better it is for other times in the near future where you're going to need to continue engaging with them. They'll be familiar with you. They'll know who you are. They'll be familiar with your programming. They'll be familiar with your work. And all of this really does set the stage for you to build a very good relationship. And if next year, you know, if you're a state captain this year and you want to be a state captain again next year, all of this helps to make all of the work that state captains do increasingly easy because you're maintaining relationships all throughout the year and not just on Capitol Hill Day. So we're also going to have opportunities for call-in days where we organize these concerted efforts for you to be in touch with the elected official's office outside of Hill Day and also the site visits during August recess that we're encouraging for you to have. And the same goes for our email campaigns. So please be in touch with us. We definitely are very interested in building relationships with you as well to ensure that you all are supported, to ensure that you guys are receiving the most up-to-date information, and to make sure that you're equipped with all the tools to keep building relationships with your elected officials, keep staying on their radar, letting them know who you are, your program outcomes, and your advocacy asks. Next slide, please. In addition to your elected officials, we especially want for you to keep in touch with us. And by us, I really mean me, your national field organizer. So sign up for our Alliance Advocacy Alerts and review our advocacy resources. So when you come to the conference, for all of those who will be with us, please be sure to stop by the advocacy table, and we'll be giving you printed materials, or just chat with us and say hello. We're super friendly. We really want to get to know you. And of course, please email me directly, as well as our Congressional Relations Specialist, Noelle Porter. We're the advocacy staff here. We're definitely here to support everything that I work with you all to do in the field. My colleague, Noelle Porter, follows up with on the Hill and makes sure that the legislative offices are just as engaged as our field offices and our members in the field like you. And so now we're going to go into questions. And we've received a couple in the duration of the webinar. And so I'm going to ask them, and then I'm going to be bouncing them off to Steve, our very knowledgeable Vice President here at the Alliance. And so here is our first question, Steve. You ready?
Yep.
If we can't be a part of Hill Day, how can we still be involved in advocacy efforts and know what the priorities are?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, because we know that not everybody can go to Hill Day and not everybody can come to our conference, but we need everybody's help on this. So the main thing is to get on our website, on the advocacy section of our website, and sign up for our advocacy alerts, because that's the way we communicate with people about what's going on in Congress, and when it's especially important for people to take action. We try to limit our requests for action to the times when it's most necessary and most important. And the way to find out when those times are is by signing up for the advocacy alerts, and then just pay attention to our website, follow us on Twitter. You can find out about things there. And we're in the middle of producing a bunch of paper about all these different policy priorities that we'll use at the Hill Day, but all of that stuff will be on our website and ready for people to access as soon as it's finished. And let me just say, if people have questions, you'll see over on the right-hand side of the screen on the webinar software, there's a chat box, and make sure that's open, and then you can type a message there with your questions and make sure it's set up to go to the entire audience. Did you have another one you wanted to run by me, Rashida?
Yeah, I do. So another question that we got coming in is, should we still advocate for $2.8 billion for McKinney during Hill Day, even though the House and Senate didn't go that high? Should we focus on the higher amount?
Yeah, so this is always a good question. We believe that it's important to put an amount out there for homeless assistance that really represents a serious progress for this year. We don't, ask for everything we need forever, but we came up with the 2.8 billion figure as what it would take to really deal with the fact that more people are getting evicted, that rents are going up in a lot of places, and more people are becoming homeless. And we encourage people to continue to advocate for that. If the Senate and House each have a number, they're less than what we've advocated for. Obviously, we prefer the higher of those two numbers, or we prefer going a little above that even more. But we think the way to express that is to focus on the 2.8 number, which again, that's calculated as what it needs not only to keep existing capacity in place, but also to expand capacity enough to deal with more people coming into homelessness.
So we have another question that's come in. It's, what committee has jurisdiction over the USICH bills, and are there hearings scheduled?
Okay, as of right now, there's no hearings scheduled. The committees that have jurisdiction in the House, it's called the Financial Services Committee, and in the Senate, it's the Banking Committee. It's got a longer name than that, but it's known as the Banking Committee. In both the House and Senate, housing is considered a banking issue, which for a lot of people it is, but it just comes under there. The other thing to know about that, though, is that it's oftentimes that bills such as this that are relatively non-controversial end up getting passed as part of the appropriations process. So it's important also to talk to the Appropriations Committee about this, not only because USICH needs funding in order to keep going, but that they might be the ones who ultimately have to put the bill on their bill. And in fact, the sponsors of the USICH bill, the main sponsors in the Senate, are the chairs of the Appropriations Subcommittee that deals with HUD. That's Senator Collins from Maine and Senator Reed from Rhode Island, who are longtime champions of these programs. So that's another good reason to make sure to talk to the Appropriations Committees about this. Several months to go in this Congress, and it's a little unclear what their priorities are going to be. So we are encouraging people to continue to talk about the effect of these bills, and these are proposals that have been around for a while and will continue to come up year after year. So it's important to really get the point across that bills that would raise rents for the lowest income people are going to cause problems for dealing with homelessness, because those are the people that end up homeless.
So we have a couple of questions from the state captains who have joined the call, who have joined the webinar, about what state captains should be expecting to receive and whether they need to prepare any questions in preparation for their Hill Day meetings. And I just wanted to take the time to answer those questions and say thank you for the state captains who have signed in for the webinar. So no, state captains do not have to prepare any questions. We actually provide you all with all of the information that you are going to need to be as prepared as possible for your Hill Day meetings. You will be picking up all of this information at the Advocacy Hub when you check into the conference, and we all look forward to meeting you in person. I've been corresponding with some of you over the course of a couple of months, so I definitely look forward to meeting you all in person and helping to answer any more of your questions, particularly if you've had additional questions since, like outside of our emails or outside of the conference calls, or any additional questions that may have popped up in between the time of your arrival to DC and this webinar. So state captains will be armed to the teeth with everything that they need to know to have the most successful Hill Day meetings possible. So you don't need to come up with your own questions.
And this is Steve again. I would just like to reiterate how much we appreciate the people who sign up to be state captains for this. This is a important job. It's important that members of Congress understand how it is that they have a role to play in what's going on with homelessness in these communities, and the people who are the state captains, some of whom do this year after year for no additional compensation. We couldn't do it without you, and that goes not only for the state captains, but everyone who's participating in Hill Day and who participates in advocacy activities afterwards. So thank you again for doing all of that.
I also just want to add on to that. If you've signed into the webinar and you happen to not be a state captain, but you will be attending the conference and you will be participating in Hill Day, please feel free to reach out to your state captain and let them know that you're very interested and eager to be participating in Hill Day, that you're a member of their delegation, and that you're very interested in supporting Hill Day efforts, attending meetings, because everything that they do to organize you all and to make sure that your voices are heard on Hill Day. The work of a state captain is by no means easy, even though we provide them with as many tools as possible. We do realize that sometimes there are some challenges. So we're especially grateful to our state captains. But if you're on this call and you're not a state captain, but you're attending the conference and you will be participating in Hill Day, please reach out to your state captain. I do welcome you to email me personally if you want to know who your state captain is. Again, my email address is in the Keep in Touch portion of the webinar, which you're now looking at. It's rlateef@naeh.org. I discourage anyone from calling me, particularly because when things are on email, you can always refer to it back on the record. It's very easy for me to respond by email rather than by phone because, as you can imagine, the couple of days leading up to the conference, we're all running around in this office.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Hi, this is Sean. I see a question. Someone asked me if I could explain a little bit more about why work requirements are problematic. So I just wanted to go over that. So during the webinar, I talked about the administrative burden itself. But I will say this, that homelessness itself is also a barrier to employment. So obviously, limited access to showers, washing machines, it makes it very difficult to a person to meet hygiene requirements and dress codes for the unsheltered or people sleeping in shelter. Often means people endure chronic sleep deprivation and stress related to not having a safe and comfortable place to rest. Shelter hours are not always flexible. Sometimes forcing people to choose between getting in line in the afternoon for a bed or working during the day. So people experiencing homelessness, they also often lack reliable mailing addresses, phone access to computers needed to apply for jobs, and transportation needed to get to work. And even for those who do manage to work, including those who work in unstable jobs, that may not provide enough hours each month to meet the requirements, and those people would still be at risk of losing coverage. Now, some of these states are talking about exemptions for people experiencing homelessness, but they're not really defined. And even with that, of course, that requires extensive documentation and meeting deadlines. And if those deadlines aren't met, it's much more difficult to document the exemption, but it's much easier to take someone off the roll. And so that's one of the big fears. And so take for Kentucky, for example. So they do say that people who have experienced homelessness for a certain amount of time will be exempt. So if you are in a shelter for 6 months, that does not include you. And then for those who do qualify for an exemption are only protected up to 6 months. So obviously with the expansion, this was a wonderful opportunity for people experiencing homelessness who did not have access to care to now gain health insurance. And so now there are all these barriers, maybe an exemption, maybe not. You must work a certain amount of hours. The documentation must be in at this time or you're knocked off. It clearly imposes a huge burden on people experiencing homelessness. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Rashida again. We're receiving some questions about how to get involved, and I just want to make sure that I go over the website again, even though it was mentioned in the webinar. I just want to take you all through it now. You can go to endhomelessness.org. And once you get to the website, you would be clicking on Help End Homelessness, and a drop-down is going to appear, and you are going to click on Become an Advocate. When you get to Become an Advocate, you're going to see Become an Advocate again, and then you are going to see that there is an option to sign up now, And that's where you receive all of our advocacy updates. So that's where you receive information about call-in days, and that's where you receive information about emails. And so again, we very much encourage you all to keep in touch. You can especially keep in touch with me. You can email me. Again, my email address is rlateef@naeh.org. I encourage emails over phone calls, although you may, try to call me as well. I'm pretty responsive either way. But we definitely want to encourage everyone to keep in touch. We want for this to be the first of many things that we do together, especially after Hill Day. The only way that our work is going to be successful is if we maintain momentum, if we continue to apply pressure, and we continue to do so in a coordinated, concerted effort. So at this time, we're going to wrap up. We want to thank everyone for tuning into the webinar. This webinar will be made available to people on our organization's website. And we, again, encourage you all to keep in touch. We love hearing from you. I love hearing from you. So please don't be a stranger. Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.